All right, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast, the PGA edition. I am your host, as always, Bryan. I am joined by Colin and Peter Jennings, aka CSU Ram 88, and the time is here, the fourth and final major of 2017. It is a great week of golf. We are coming off a really awesome tournament, actually. Saw some great performances in the Bridgestone Invitational. We're going to hit on that quickly and definitely how it relates to this week, because there are some guys in excellent form, especially winner Hideki Matsuyama. So we'll talk about that, but we're going to definitely skew really heavily towards analyzing the PGA Championship and everything Quail Hollow. Again, I am joined by Colin and Peter. Colin, what's happening, man?
Pete apparently is so excited for PGA, he just came off the course wearing the Fantasy Labs golf shirt, which is a new and exciting piece of merchandise. Mine must have gotten lost in the mail. I'm sure it'll be coming any second now. Nice outfit, dude. Like, that's when are we going to have the Fantasy Labs open? That's the better question.
We need to have the open, and gotta bring the A game in terms of attire for the majors here. But fortunately, no golf, no real golf for me today. We have San Francisco-esque weather today. I think the high is like 68, 69. It's rainy and kind of just misty here in Colorado. So no golf for me today, but very excited for the PGA Championship and really enjoyed watching the final round. I needed Matsuyama to come through, and he did. So pretty happy with how last week went, even though it was a no-cut event.
Yeah, no, very interesting tournament. We're going to get into that just a little bit. So before we hop into Bridgestone, Pete, I'm curious your thoughts on Steph Curry. And we had talked about how cool it was that he was, playing in the web.com tour event and how good it was for golf. And from all the people that were watching, tweeting about it, how crazy packed it was at the web.com tour event, it seemed like it was a really good spot. We don't need to spend too much time, but I thought that was a cool story.
Yeah, very cool story. The fact that he shot 74 both days is really impressive. It's way different than going out and shooting 74 at your club or wherever, whatever course you play at, inside the ropes with the fans and everything. Just shows what a good athlete he is, and absolutely was great for golf and for the web.com tour.
Yeah, very cool. All right, let's talk just a little bit about the Bridgestone, and we'll definitely put on the lens of how it affects people moving to the PGA Championship this week. And I think the really big question, Colin, I had mentioned to these off air, Hideki Matsuyama obviously just put up an amazing round on Sunday. He shot a 61, ended up just completely dominating the field, won by 5 strokes. 9 under on Sunday was incredible. And I think the thing that stood out to me was that it seemed a little similar to how Jon Rahm dominated the Irish Open. And it was something that we've mentioned the last couple of weeks, is that his data is really affected by absolutely smashing a field. And this is a little bit different, no-cut event, but stronger field, different course. But I'm curious, Colin, is Matsuyama's performance sort of similar to Rahm smashing the Irish Open?
I think it's Rahm's performance on steroids, honestly. I think that if you just look at the distribution of scores there, just like how much he smashed the field, I think, won by 4 strokes, like 5th place, like beat 5th place by like 7 or 8 strokes. It's 9, sorry. Like that's a commanding margin. And yeah, we talked about how Rahm's Irish Open performance had a huge margin of victory. Matsuyama's comes against the strongest field in golf pretty much. And that's a really great performance heading right into the PGA. So yeah, I think he is, especially to have that result not priced into his salary. He's clearly one of just the top end value. Its only question is like how chalky can he get? Because obviously I think everyone else is looking right at that.
Yeah.
And it's still an open question on whether or not he's playable in the Millionaire Maker, just because ownership is going to be so high. But God, that's tough to fade after you see that performance. So, Pete, I'm sure you're excited, just all else being equal, to roster Matsuyama any given week. But what do you think is? Do you think it's going to become unplayable just on ownership alone?
I don't think so, because I think ownership's still going to be spread out amongst the expensive guys. I think a lot of people are going to be on Rory this week. I think the public is still on Spieth given his major wins. I still think Rahm sets up pretty well here. I mean, really, there's arguments to be made for almost everyone kind of towards the top. But yeah, he would have come in and been pretty nice option just in terms of ownership to equity. I think Matsuyama would have been, but now his ownership's way higher. So I'm at this point, I'm trying to figure out kind of what I'm going to do at the top to get leverage. But it's interesting. I mean, I think Ricky Fowler still will soak up a decent bit of ownership at that price point too. But now I think Matsuyama will probably be a little bit more heavily owned.
Yeah, I mean that's the question is what does Matsuyama's performance do for his ownership? And I think even like a couple of weeks ago, we were saying that I think this was for the British Open, I believe. We were saying that a golfer just in the Millie Maker in a major is just not going to have high ownership. Like it's not going to get above 30%. That's just how it is. Like a stud's just not going to be that way because it's going to be distributed. And then we saw Ricky at nearly 40%. So Colin, is that data, the British Open ownership data, like maybe is that what's making you a little more worried about Matsuyama? Is that maybe a golfer that's just loved by the public and touted after really good recent weeks could actually get over 30%?
Yeah, the British has got me a little wondering about like what is the max ceiling now for an ownership like in a major. I know, like in Ricky's case, he's just generally a popular guy among the casual fans. How well that translates into like an ownership ceiling is kind of the open question because, Matsuyama isn't as beloved as a player as Ricky, just from the casual fan. How much that translates into ownership, I don't really have a good grasp on, but like depending on how the recs shake out, like, yeah, I mean, I could definitely see someone being 30 owned. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be Matsuyama? Is it the same thing as Ricky, even when someone plays well? I don't know. Like you've probably wondered about that in different sports altogether, like the fan interest of a player and how much it translates into ownership, kind of like rooting interest to ownership conversion and how it might be different for each player for a bunch of kind of subjective reasons.
It definitely can vary, but we see certain guys kind of always soak up ownership. I think Ricky's always been a fan favorite, even when he didn't merit, basically people taking him. And obviously he's had a great year, which has boosted his equity. And we've seen his ownership kind of stay where it is, but it's always a challenge. I mean, this week in particular, I think is probably the most difficult to gauge. I do think ownership will be spread out because there's so many reasons to go on different guys here. But it's one of those things where I'm going to be really interested to see kind of, because certain guys are really close, like Rory McIlroy versus Jordan Spieth. Who do you think is going to be more heavily owned?
Rory.
I think I have it Spieth as of now, just because I guess like recent ownership and people have been in the dumps for Rory. I don't know like how much people are willing to like get back on the wagon as much.
I have to imagine tout stuff is going to be all over Rory.
Yeah, if I have to think who's going to be touting stuff, it's going to be Rory because it's going to be the world's worst kept secret that he smashes a Quail Hollow, and
right.
That's going to be the first thing that everyone keys in on for recommendations.
Right. So you had that. I would have said Ricky would have been more owned than Matsuyama before, but now it looks like it's definitely going to be Matsuyama with the current form. Ricky does have good course history here as well, so there's two guys at the top that can split ownership. Jason Day is probably going to be the one guy who you can get leveraged in this spot, but just watching this last week, he did not look good just in terms of his back. He played pretty well, especially I believe on Friday. He had that really nice round. Friday or Saturday, in the middle of the tournament, he had a great round, but his back really looked bothersome to me. And then you have another range of pricing where you got guys like John Rahm, in the 10-1 range. Then you have a couple guys in the 9K range, like Sergio and Justin Rose, that could soak up a decent bit of ownership as well. So it's an interesting week. There's a lot of different ways you can go at the top. And I think we'll see ownership spread out a little bit more than we have in the previous majors this year.
Yeah, definitely fair. All right, well, let's jump into our analysis of this week's PGA Championship. And as always, we'll start with just talking about the course. The PGA Championship is one of the majors that rotates courses. It was in Jersey last year at the Balch Stroll Golf Club. This year it is in Charlotte, North Carolina at Quail Hollow, which has not hosted a major. Of note, it does host the Wells Fargo Championship. So that moved this year, obviously not at Quail Hollow because they were setting it up for the PGA Championship. But it is interesting to note because a lot of these courses that rotate, That usually for like the U.S. Open or the PGA Championship, they'll only host those majors when they rotate. So we don't have that much data. So it is interesting that even in a rotating event like the PGA Championship, we have a lot of data on Quail Hollow, which leads me to my very first question, Colin, before we sort of dive into what the courses or what Quail Hollow what golfers do well is I've seen a lot of people actually analyze past PGA Championship data, like the last 5 years of PGA Championship finishes and stuff like that, as opposed to Quail Hollow data. So my question is just pretty simple. Should you look at Wells Fargo data over the last 5-6 years, or should you look at PGA Championship data over the last 5 or 6 years?
I think it's Wells Fargo. I don't really understand the idea of like a PG, I get it maybe for the U.S. Open when they like consistently want to make it penalizing around the rough and they like deliberately try to get like really like low scores or like, keep the birdies to a minimum. But with Quail Hollow, like you start with the fact that even normally it's 7,500 yards, even if you wanted to PGA-ify it somehow, like that still leans distance no matter what. It's pretty hard to dress up and modify the course or whatever to like not make distance important. And second, like there's just so much variety among these one-offs like PGA courses. Like I don't think unless people have like shown and tested that all PGA courses like play the same using like past course fit data and showing there's some level of consistency, like that's a huge assumption to make without any real backing. So that surprises me that people are kind of doing the subset of PGA. I mean, maybe like the only signal you get is if you believe that people play differently during majors, but that's kind of a separate, almost I think more subjective conversation because I don't think that translates into course fit. I think that's kind of just searching for fool's gold. So, I mean, that seems pretty straightforward answer to me. I don't know what would change that. So, Pete, do your work if you can.
No, I don't have anything really to add to that. I think you analyze the course that we have history on. I mean, that just makes the most sense. I know there was a change in the putting greens in 2013 to a different type of bent grass, which I'll actually look at just a little bit. I will. Obviously, we wait only the past 5 years anyways, but I do think that change is something that will make me weight the recent data even more. There's obviously tournaments that we can go back and look at that are a little bit farther back that might have just a teeny bit of value, but those are diminished even more with the change in the greens. I think we just look at the history since 2013 and really weight that the most.
Definitely fair. So Colin, I brought this up pre-pod, and it's because I was really curious about this question, but Quail Hollow versus PGA Championship. So one thing I did is I built models, 2 separate models for Quail Hollow and for PGA Championship, just to see which metrics back tested, better at Quail Hollow versus PGA Championship, see if we can find an edge. And obviously, distance is important at both. PGA Championship courses are usually long; they favor bombers, and that's definitely still true at Quail Hollow. Like it is 7,500 yards or almost 7,500 yards, and the bombers do play well. But at least for my data, it says that Quail Hollow, more than the typical PGA Championship course, definitely skews a little more accuracy, specifically in like metrics like accuracy off the tee and bogey avoidance. What are your thoughts on there? Am I sort of reading too much into this?
I think that's really like eating at the margins. Yeah, I don't think I just think the easiest one, just like, especially since distance is just the most predictable player stat in general. This lines up as a distance course. I think that's tinkering around the edges and probably flirting with noise a little bit too much. Because I don't see. I mean, I don't have accuracy popping all that much, except for maybe 1 year in 2014, which kind of looks like a fluky. Doesn't look like any other course fit. But yeah, I would just stick with distance to keep it simpler.
That's fair. Pete, any thoughts there? Are you going to just go really heavy distance, or are you on my side that I think I would skew more accuracy this year than I would in a normal PGA Championship year?
I'm going to have to disagree with you, Brian. I'm going, just give me the distance. Give me the guys who can bomb it. If you look at the course, I mean, these par 4s are ridiculously long. And the one thing that I could see, if I found an accuracy guy that it really does well on approach from 175 and longer. I could get behind a player like that. There are some guys who hit their long irons extremely well that aren't quite as long off the tee, but in general, I think that the distance guys, the guys who can really bomb it out there, are going to have a huge advantage, and that shows in course history as well. So I'm leaning on the course history stuff that we have, and basically the layout of the course as well. It seems pretty obvious it's a distance course.
Yeah, and to clarify, I definitely think that distance is like whatever percentage, 3 times more important than accuracy. My point is that in other PGA Championship events, some guys that have distance and aren't super accurate aren't penalized as much as guys that have long distance but are at least semi-accurate. I guess is my point. So just slightly more important, but we can disagree there. Any other thoughts on the course, Colin? You want to jump into the players here?
No, I'll start talking about players.
All right. Okay. So let's start at the top here. We sort of went over this with the Matsuyama conversation from the Bridgestone, but definitely interesting guys up at the top. Spieth, obviously playing about as well as you could possibly play. He is 12K. Rory McIlroy is the next highest priced guy at 11.8. Again, his course history here at Quail Hollow is pretty unmatched. His last 5 events, 4th place, 2015 he won. 14, 8th place, 10th place, and then back in 2012 he got 2nd place. He did win in 2010 as well. So we talked about Spieth, elite course history at Augusta. I think Rory probably qualifies for that at Quail Hollow. Dustin Johnson, 11.4. Ricky's actually the 4th highest priced guy at 10.7. Then we got Matsuyama at 10.4. So let's start with these like really, really high price studs. Talk about them a little bit. Colin, what are your thoughts?
So, with Rory, it's this weird question of, do you think he's back, yes or no? Because it's tough to interpret such a polarizing set of results. 2 missed Euro cuts and then 2 top 5s in the strongest field. That is, trying to find a middle ground is really tough for me there. Only compounded by the fact that this is basically Rory's home course with amazing, finishes. I'm hoping that he ends up being the most touted golfer so I can fade him and not feel bad about it. But he is the one that I feel the least confident about trying to put all the pieces together and interpret all of these different factors. I think as of now, the ownership's going to be pretty distributed. I think people are on Spieth and DJ just because, they're household names. But in terms of equity, the way the numbers shake out, I do have Matsuyama's number 1 overall. The explanation is pretty straightforward. He put up a huge margin in a tough field that boosts equity massively. Whether or not that's real and just almost giving him too much credit, I don't know. But it's really tough to overlook when you just crush a strong field. So I don't know that there's the only thing that I feel confident on is basically fade Jason Day because you don't get enough equity out of it. Other than that, probably fade Ricky just because his ownership is always going to be too high. So as of now, the answer may shake out that there's no way to get leverage at the top, so to just go with the best value and look for it elsewhere.
Or the guy you believe in, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know who to believe in because maybe that's it's really tough to separate that. Maybe that requires some subjective angles. So, who's got a tiebreaker for me here?
I got some interesting data points. I think that are relative this week. So Matsuyama obviously played incredible, shot 61 on Sunday. Some people like to go with that trend, which I think will boost his ownership even more. They like the trend of take the guy who played really well on the weekend the week before. So Matsuyama is going to get that, the win. He also hits his long irons extremely well, probably the best iron player in the game. Jordan Spieth could maybe make an argument for his short irons and wedges, but Matsuyama, just in terms of pure ball striking, is right there. The one thing that's let him down is his putter, which he obviously did a good job with on Sunday. The interesting thing about Matsuyama, just as a side note, which will give hope to all golfers out there, apparently his range session was his worst range session that the media had ever seen, right before he goes out and shoots 61 at a tough course. So whatever you suck in the range.
I actually needed to hear that for my personal golf game. So that actually is legit inspiring.
Yep, that's interesting. In terms of Rory, he looks really back to me. There's a ton of, basically they're pointing out over and over and over again between CBS and the Golf Channel that Rory was hitting all his drives over 300 yards. It was majestic to watch. He was just absolutely bombing his driver, total driving. The only guy who had a higher driving distance, I believe, on the week was J.B. Holmes, but obviously J.B. is not nearly as accurate as Rory. So Rory's driver's been back. Really, the only thing that's been letting him down is the putter and just overspinning wedges. I think he's really going to work on dialing in his wedges. And the one nice thing from my perspective is this equipment change finally looks like it's kind of settling in. And that really is a big deal. You look at a lot of these golfers when they switch equipment, a lot of the guys that went from the Nike stuff, someone like Kevin Chappell, they struggled initially and they've started to find their form a little bit. So I combined that with Rory. He also had an injury, so he looked really good just from the long game, which is his big strength, and I think that's going to show again this week. So it seems to me Rory's really coming into form, and if he can find the putter in the short game just a little bit, he should be the favorite. So I like Rory at the top. I do think Dustin Johnson actually will be the most leveraged golfer. I think out of this group, I think Dustin Johnson will have lower ownership than basically everyone outside of Jason Day, who I'm just not going to touch because I think he's injured and just not playing as well. So of the main guys, I don't think you're going to get a ton of leverage just in general because everyone's still going to be owned. I expect Dustin Johnson still to be pretty heavily owned, but I believe he'll have the lowest ownership out of Fowler, Matsuyama, Spieth, and Rory.
What about Rahm? Like, where would you throw Rahm into there?
I think Rahm will fall kind of right into that spot too. I think Rahm will be lower owned, and I love Rahm this week. He's the guy that I definitely am looking at. Hasn't had the results that people are looking for. Obviously, we know that I believe it was the Irish or some Euro tournament that we talked about on the podcast. Irish, right? Yeah. Where he just blew away the field. Colin mentioned that. He definitely has the upside to just run away with this if he puts everything together. So I like Jon Rahm quite a bit if he's going to be the leverage golfer in this range, but I do think it could be Dustin Johnson as well.
I think that's a good call. I mean, Jason Day probably would have the lowest ownership of the group, but I agree. Like, if the guy's 10K and above,
he will have the lowest ownership. I don't think anyone's disagreed with that. I think he will be the lowest owned 10K plus guy.
Yeah, but still not worth it.
Agreed.
Still not worth it. I mean, that's tough. Okay, so let's dip down just a little bit here, and this really is an interesting tier here, like in that 8-9K range. Hendrik Stenson is at 9.8. He has maybe like some of the worst course history here at Quail Hollow. He has a miscut. Last year got 58th and 15, and then 13, 12, and 11 he has miscut. So about as bad history as you could find. Sergio and Justin Rose and some of these other guys like Justin Thomas, 8-9, aren't playing super great right now. Sergio is okay, but they didn't put up great performances at the Bridgestone. Definitely compared to these guys at the top here. Brooks, Koepka obviously been playing really well, but definitely an interesting range of golfers because I do think that we're going to find some lower ownership here. Colin, I'll kick to you first. What are your thoughts on this range?
I mean, it's still pretty flat across the board. I think we're correct to kind of fixate over the top end guys because that's like it's a major. It's probably going to be what influences the most. I think Stenson will be plenty lower owned, but just it is such atrocious history that I can't even. It's just in Here Be Dragons territory. I don't know what to do with it. I think Brooks will still people will probably see just the price be so dramatically lower than what they're used to. Which is weird because I think his fit is just fine. There's no history, which is mildly concerning, but I think he could. I think Brooks will be pretty decently chalky. The interesting guy, and how far down are we going for this range, by the way, to where I get to interesting people?
We can dip down into the mid 8s if you want.
Yeah, so pound for pound, I think the guy who has the best history here is Phil Mickelson. Yeah. It is phenomenal finishes. He's definitely punched above his weight class for a while, and I think depending on how all the other ownership shakes out, if people flock towards high value, low mid 7s, Phil is in that sweet spot where he could get overlooked. So you might actually be able to get a little bit of leverage out of Phil. So it's I'll see how the week shakes out. But he'll definitely be there. The other high risk, high reward, you can get some leverage out of is Justin Thomas, who I think if it's distance, he's always there. He's boom or bust, doesn't have great history here. But like, yeah, maybe if he shows up for majors, kind of like he did, at the U.S. Open, then, it's always on the table. So I know the only ones I'm kind of looking at just on leverage are Phil and Justin Thomas so far.
Yeah. Phil's particularly interesting. I actually wrote down this question to ask UMP is like some of these guys, Phil's definitely a good example, but even a guy like Danny Lee, who's going to be in the bargain bin, we could talk just a little bit, like really good course history, awful current form. And it's like, how do you deal with that? You can obviously build a model where like you sort of weight both things and see where he pops. But Phil is tough for me because he's not really high in my model because of his recent form, but it's hard to get over that history as well. Pete, what are your thoughts on these guys here?
It's always a challenge, right? Recent form, course history, the blend of how those tie together is always the challenge. We're looking for regression, and normally I go against the recency bias because that ownership tends to drift that direction. But over the last year or so, I would say course history has been touted so much that it's also kind of made it more interesting to go look at the recent form over the history. So that's a big evolution in DFS golf. I do think Phil Mickelson's interesting. The other guy who I'm really – normally I'd be all over this guy, and I've been all over him for the majors this year, and it's going to really tilt me if he goes off because I don't know if I'm going to have much of him, is Justin Rose. Justin Rose also has good history. He doesn't have the count that Mickelson does have, but it would seem it sets up well for him. Historically, been a great driver, great long iron player. The putters just kind of let him down in certain situations, but Rose's current form also doesn't leave a lot to be desired. So Rose and Mickelson are the two guys that have the name recognition, the history, but don't have the great current form that I'm really not sure what to do with. I think Colin probably has a better answer in terms of how to weight those, but it's the constant challenge. And I think the big, basically way to decipher who to take is ownership, and ownership just kind of shifted recently. But my favorite guy in this range for sure is Justin Thomas, great par 4 scorer. I don't think he's a cash game play, but I absolutely love him for tournaments. If he can just avoid some of these big blow-up holes, he's certainly in a position where he can really get going. You look at these par 5s that are 500 yards or longer, right in that range. I think that sets up better for Justin Thomas than almost anyone. He's second on tour in weighted birdie average. You look at his par 4 scoring, he's elite, and he has the distance to do well on these long par 4s where most players are going to struggle. So I really like the Justin Thomas call that Colin just gave. I think he makes a ton of sense for tournaments. In terms of equity plays, I think it's probably Koepka here as the best overall chalk, potential cash game play, and then trying to decipher what to do with Justin Rose and Phil Mickelson, who are tough to decipher. And then there's obviously Adam Scott, too, who always seems to be chalk in these majors.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with trying to analyze the recent versus course history, really just course history in general, Colin, I'm sure you thought about this, is that like Justin Rose, for example, he has his last 2 times here, he finished 3rd and 5th. So you can try to figure out, okay, that's great course history, obviously 2 top 5 finishes over his last 2, not great recent form. You can try to deal with that, but you can also it's really hard to figure out like whether his course history is noisy or not, because I mean, like theoretically, maybe Justin Rose was just playing really well heading into Quail Hollow those 2 times. So maybe he doesn't have amazing course history. Maybe he was just hot at the time or playing really well, and then he doesn't have great course history. But he probably has more confidence there. Like there's just so many factors that go into it, especially with the small sample size that that course history is just so hard for me to analyze, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about this before, like course history is always an incomplete discussion without like basically taking into account how well it's basically like course history always has to be relative to expectation. And essentially otherwise like you're just going to be wildly over or underweighting like how much it actually affects them. One of the things that I think one of our working theories or theses that we had working this year is course history versus recent form may be different for distance courses than accuracy courses. If your recent form is bad, your recent driving distance is bad, and this is a driver course, that's pretty tough to kind of navigate around. But like if it's an accuracy course, accuracy is something easier to regain if it fits your eye instead of distance.
So longer courses exacerbates the problem.
I think so. Yeah, all else being equal, like I would guess that. Yeah.
I agree with Colin, especially if you can target, and that's actually something I've looked at, is the recent driving distance in the form. So the one thing that I'm looking at in current form, which is why, again, we can go back to Rory, that I love him this week, is just looking at the recent form for driving distance and driving accuracy. And obviously Rory had some bad driving sequences that have kind of brought down his driving accuracy for his recent form. You just look at the number in Fantasy Labs, but if you look at his driving accuracy in certain spots, he's definitely capable of getting, he's very capable of hitting a ton of fairways and just way down there. I mean, his driving distance last week, 343 yards on average. That includes where he didn't hit driver as well. I think it really sets up well. So that's a great way. I think Colin made a really good point here. Just kind of look at their current form in driving for these guys and weight that more so than their just adjusted round number.
Awesome. All right, let's dip down just a little bit more. And I think there's going to be some very, very chalky guys in this range if we're sort of looking at the 7K range. One guy that I think that we'll probably just have to start our conversation with, he seems just to be one of the top 5 highest owned guys in almost every tournament.
Are we going to do it all at once, like just blind, like we have no idea? We're all going to say his name at once to see if we all know that we're talking about the same guy?
Sure, we can do that.
All right. 1, 2, 3.
Casey.
Wow. I am off of there. Okay. All right. I have to take a penalty.
I like Finau too, by the way. He's like.
Oh, I love Finau. Yeah.
Casey, though, I will take being more heavily owned than Finau if you want that.
Yeah.
I think it's close as of now. Like
I have someone I think might be just as owned as Finau too in that same range, and I think it's Gary Woodland.
Yeah, like that. I'll take Woodland under. I think it really depends on how touts shake out. But yes, as a value ownership nexus, I love it for sure.
Hoffman might be up there too.
Yeah, that's something that's not priced in. I mean, I don't know, It probably does help to figure out who wasn't priced in to this, whose results weren't and did well in this range. But sorry, I'm just still flummoxed from my one of these things is not like the others. I'm just.
Paul Casey, do you not see Paul Casey being heavily owned?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Yeah. 78 is I don't know. That's almost an insulting price for Paul Casey.
Yeah, I mean the only reason that I can see it maybe being justified is it's not a great fit. He doesn't his distance isn't super great.
See, I think it is a good fit. He has a good recent distance. I mean, great recent form just in general, but his recent distance has been solid. And this is where we can disagree, but I do think that his distance is good enough, and being accurate, at least recently at Quail Hollow, I think is at least somewhat important, approaching greens. So Paul Casey, I think, is long enough recently and has the accuracy where I think he's a pretty good fit, at least this week.
I'm with Bryan here, Colin. I think Casey actually is a pretty good fit. One of the best ball strikers on tour, good long iron player. Not the longest guy, but not short either. It's not we're looking at Russell Knox or Zach Johnson or something like that. Yeah. He's long enough, and he hits his irons extremely well. So I think Casey's a good fit. Obviously, we don't have the same amount of course history relative to some other guys, but I anticipate Casey's going to be uber chalk when it's all said and done.
Yeah, he's like the cash game play of the week, right? You just
I would agree with that. It's pretty solid. Yeah, it's pretty consistent. That's and cash game for sure. Yeah, even in tournaments it'll be chalk. I don't know if it makes a difference as far as I think the Finau Casey ownership line is an interesting one, and I think it'll depend on who do people like more, essentially, Rory or Matsuyama in terms of that top end chalk. The more that you need savings, you'll probably go Finau, but if people like Matsuyama, I think people also drift towards Casey more as kind of correlated outcomes.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And so your point, Colin, the model that I built specifically for Quail Hollow, Finau is my top rated player. Him and Matsuyama are right there, 1 and 2. Sort of relative to that price. So I think that you're right.
That's the only guy who's not uber expensive in my top 8. So Finau's number 4. I need to figure out something though. Jason Day's number 2 in my model. That's a big X that I'm putting next to.
Well, it's probably his course history, right?
Just looking through it, it's his course history, and I don't have driving accuracy weighted at all in my model. And his recent form is at 38.4%, so that's just going to immediately drag him down. But if you weight distance and you weight long-term adjusted round quite heavily, Jason Day will still pop, but he should not be popping in my opinion.
Yeah. Maybe a guy to X out for sure. All right, so let's talk about some of these other guys. So Paul Casey, we talked about some of the potential chalk here. Woodland, Hoffman, Finau. What are some guys that we think would be some interesting pivots? Like, for example, Colin, I'll start. Like, I have Casey and Daniel Berger as fairly close this week, but I think Casey might be like 20% more owned than Berger.
I mean, I think Berger will still be up there. Like, I don't think Berger's necessarily a safe pivot if you want to get down into like the, sub 10 range.
Sure, yeah. I meant like 30 versus like 10, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I don't think it'll be that bad, but like, sure. I think the two ones that pop for me that stand a chance of being semi-low owned, I think Gary Woodland as of now is still going to be pretty low. I mean, like, I'll take him under 15.
Yeah, maybe that's a good line. I think you're saying under 10%.
I think it'll be moderately low, and I think the first good guy that I like that'll be under 10% is probably Kevin Chappell, who has the same history as Woodland. I think he definitely has a distance to set up for it. The fact that I didn't even and with this whole equipment switch thing, if you think that's affecting recent form, then that could set up really nicely. And I think he could fly under the radar. I think the eternal question in the second half of 2017 is what to do with Steve Stricker. I think
Steve Stricker here, buddy. You gotta think.
Yeah, I think because
don't take the 50-year-old plus guy on.
Yeah, I know that's but need at what if he had 0.1% ownership, would you take him?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so what about 2%?
I think you can find better plays.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it gets tough at a certain point. So that's all I'm saying. As far as realistic sub 5 plays, as far as good pivots, I mean, I'm still on Bern Wiesberger as being a legit golfer. I think his long term just shows so much. He's pretty popular last week. Didn't have a great result, but I still think it's justifiable. And the one that I feel like we're just going to keep recommending until it actually hits and then makes us all geniuses is boss Ross Fisher, who I think the difference this time is he has history to back up our good fit.
Oh, yeah.
600 I think is pretty darn cheap for that. You can build a lot, and I think he's just going to have pretty low ownership. So,
I like that.
You hit one of my favorite guys. Ross Fisher's one of my favorite guys. Can we go back to the mid 7K range? Because ownership, someone in this range is not going to be as owned as we think they are. Thomas Peters coming off a great week, obviously has the talent, just ridiculous distance. So I think he's a guy that definitely merits a lot of consideration. Not saying he's going to be a sub 5%. I think his ownership went up quite a bit after a good showing here at the WGC. And then a guy who I think is a really good fit for tournaments, a Justin Thomas type player who is a constant on our podcast, JB Holmes.
Yeah.
1 year before, birdie machine, just massive distance. And it's just, can the guy find enough fairways to make some noise this week? He's another guy who could be somewhat heavily owned. And then Jamie Lovemark, we've talked about a lot on distance courses. He also has good history. I imagine all these guys are going to soak up some ownership, but it's going to come lock time, and we're going to be like, oh, this guy is only X owned. I can't believe it. And it's going to be someone in this range because there's so many options.
Yeah, I bet you Lovemark will be pretty low. And another guy that I want to group in here because I do think he'll be low, and I really, really like his form.
For two, I was just going to say.
Is Xander. Keeps on playing well. He's at 7K, just as a direct pivot off Finau. I mean, him and Finau are the exact same price, and I think Xander would be single digit, whereas Finau's probably would be 20 plus.
Yeah, I agree with that too. The other guy that's right there, I think, with Xander, that I hate to keep coming back to, but except not really, is Brendan Steele, who of the 7K range and people I think are going to be under 5%. I think he has the best history for sure. I forget, has he ever shown up in a major? I don't seem to him I don't think he's been in a whole lot of top 1% lineup. So I don't know if there's
he seems like he disappoints in these big fields.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so U.S. Open was a good showing, missed at the British this year, was okay at the Masters. I don't know, it's still inconclusive for me, but if there's a place where you want to bank in someone's history, I mean, there's some pretty there's 2 top 15 finishes here. There's one miscut. I think on aggregate it's still pretty good considering where he is normally. So, like, I mean, it's mostly like if he was like over 7%, I probably wouldn't take him. But like, I think he can be under 5%, and I think that's what justifies his play.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many guys in this range. Like even Webb Simpson has a second place a couple years ago at the Wells Fargo. So I mean, obviously, pretty good history there. There's so many guys in the high 6K range that I mean, we haven't even mentioned Molinari, who has really sucked ever since Colin dubbed him a top 5 player. So I think Colin just straight up cursed him there. But at 6'8", I think Colin, like just in a vacuum, if you didn't look at anything like his recent history, like 6'8", you would buy Molinari.
Yeah, like all is being good. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, does not set up well for this course at all.
Exactly.
But like,
yeah, sure, for sure.
Level, like, yeah, like I could get there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Any other guys in this range that you're interested in? I do think that this is going to be a really good place to find some.
There's so many interesting plays here. I mean, you look at a guy we haven't even talked about, who won't be talked about at all this week, I don't think really, is Jimmy Walker, who was leading the WGC. Obviously, good PGA Championship history coming out last year. I think Jimmy Walker is a guy that has really been kind of thrown under the radar because he's been dealing with this Lyme disease, which is obviously bad, but he did talk about how he's feeling a lot better. He's another guy who definitely has the distance to compete at a field like this. So Jimmy Walker at 6,900, I don't normally take him. I don't think I've taken him all year, but he's an interesting one that could show up super low owned. We mentioned a ton of guys here that just really could be leveraged. Lucas Glover, another one, a major winner that you could certainly find an argument for. Can't putt at all, but certainly has the ball striking to compete. There's a ton of guys in this range. I really like the Chapel call by Colin. I think that makes a ton of sense. I do think Finau will be really popular, but there's just so many guys here. We have to mention Hudson Swafford. I threw him out there just briefly.
Yeah, for sure.
Hudson Swafford will probably cost me another couple thousand or something like that, or tens of thousands this weekend. But hopefully he can do well for the Millionaire Maker.
Yeah, so the more I analyze this slate, specifically these guys in this range, and we're taking a lot of time on this range for a reason, because it is going to be important. Ownership is usually distributed among the top guys, and really like the 7K, high 6K ranges where you find your leverage plays. And after looking at all of these guys, Colin, that either fit really well or in good recent form, have good history, like Finau's the top guy in my model, but at 20-25%. It's like really hard to justify using him in the Million Maker.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think his equity is going to be that good. I mean, like, I just assume he's going to be 20% because, why isn't he? But like, yeah, like that's I'm in your same boat. I think there's plenty of people you can downshift to get like way more leverage because we can't emphasize it enough. All of the like expected value is in the first place payout in the Millionaire Maker, and you just need a ton of leverage. The other eternal question we never get to, it should be pretty consistent by now. How low are you? How much money could you guys see yourself leaving off the table?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Like I actually did this past week where I was so concerned because of the smaller field that going chalk would just make for a lot of lineup. So I used our multi-lineup tool, and I set like the max salary to like 98%. For some lineups. So I just built lineups that like had chalk but only used up like 48.5 or something like that. So I'm still on the chalky golfers that my model likes, but I have a better chance of that being a unique lineup. So I think that might be a good play. Pete, what were you going to say?
Well, there's a variety of interesting things here with leaving money on the table. I certainly think it makes more sense in the Millionaire Maker than any other contest. I love using our multi-lineup tool and setting even the max percentage at 99%. Basically, once you leave like 300 or 400 or more on the table, your odds of a duplicate lineup go way, 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 way down. So I'm with you there. Just a couple other golfers, just real quickly, I wanted to throw out in terms of just distance low-owned guys here. I think Kokrak's going to end up being an awful play, his awful history, but some people will potentially shift to him. He seems to get some love in these majors. But two other guys that have a ton of distance that we've talked about a decent bit in the pod all year, Patrick Rogers and Luke List. If you're just going to strictly look at the distance angle for this high 6K range, I could see either one of those guys going under 5%. Colin, any love for anyone else just real quick before we talk just basic strategy?
No, I think like the only one that I'm considered that kind of popped and then unpopped for good reasons is like only because like James Hahn is a guy that I've played a lot and is normally super low leverage and won here last year. I'm wondering how much people are gonna like fixate on like, oh, it's a sneaky like pick last year's Quail Hollow winner. I actually had his course history is like not nearly as good as his win suggests because like there's some other pretty bad results here. So I mean, I don't know. I'm probably the only one looking at James Hahn normally, but like I think he's also like he's a pretty straight up fade for me this week. So,
One other guy that I want to ask you guys about, a guy who's pretty cheap, and I've already seen a couple touts like you just mentioned him in passing, just because he was at the top of the leaderboard for a little bit there on Thursday, the Bridgestone. That's Bubba Watson at 7-3. Obviously, we're like team fade Bubba, but no, we're team fade Bubba for sure. My question is, do you think that he'll actually garner some ownership?
I hope so, because I'm fading him.
Yeah. It doesn't really change my decision because it's still a fade.
Until he switches golf balls, I'm never taking him.
That's fair.
What is his brand? Is it Volvic? Like, is that the cartoony one that he's playing? Like, it's
so bad. I played actually golf with someone who played that ball, and the sound it makes off the driver is egregious. The spin was terrible.
It's like hitting a pebble. Like, it's just like
it was. I felt the ball in my hands. I'm like, I'm never taking Bubba ever. I mean, I already wasn't, but the ball is just. It's terrible.
I've definitely found a couple of those on my course. I'm like, all right, they're the worst part about the yellow balls. I swear they're harder to find than like the white balls. Like it doesn't even do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Ironically, it doesn't work at all. Yeah, but I'm curious, Bubba. I mean, like if people are just going to tout distance over everything, like Bubba is one of the longer people on tour. So
they can tout it all they want. I hope he cracks 10%. We're all fading him. It doesn't matter.
Fair enough. All right, you guys want to pick some winners, I guess.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, I haven't gotten
three winners since we got a major here. Let's go 3 tiers, like under 7,500 or something like that.
Okay. All right.
Let's do 3 winners here. Let's try to.
Let's go top, under 9, and under like 75 or 7. Like, where do you want the bottom to be?
Let's do under 75.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll go second because I haven't gone there in a while.
All right, Pete, you want top pick?
Sure.
We'll go snake through the whole thing.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll take Rory.
I'm gonna go weird, semi-weird contrarian, go with the numbers and go Matsuyama.
I like that. I'll go Jordan. Yeah, why not?
Pretty good. He's third. That's a good third pick.
Yeah. And then under 9 now. Let's see here. I'm gonna go Paul Casey.
All right, under 9. Daniel Berger.
I love that. I love Berger this week. Right there with Casey with me.
You guys are making my life pretty easy here. I'll take Justin Thomas. I think that's a pretty solid pick.
I agree.
To make the cut or to win?
To win. Making the cut is a disaster. But I know the numbers say to take Adam Scott. It's just strictly based on odds, but Justin Thomas I like for the upside. And then under 75, I will go just straight upside, just bomber galore. I'll take JB Holmes.
I don't even feel that bad that you took him, because there are guys I like above him. One of whom I will go Gary Woodland.
Like it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll stay chalk and go Finau. Why not? I mean, equity-wise, it's hard.
The only time you get to pick him. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will end it there. We obviously have a ton of content coming up on the site. I'll have a written breakdown up probably Tuesday morning along with some other pieces. We'll have some model previews from Pete.
That's coming early. Model previews coming early.
Oh, yeah. So we're going to have a ton of content up by tomorrow, recording this Monday morning. So by Tuesday, we'll have so much stuff up. Definitely check that out. And good luck this week. And we'll talk to you guys very soon.